In this graph, let's examine the effects of cardiac output and total peripheral resistance on blood pressure. And first, let's focus on Poiseuille's law over here, just for an overview. And Poiseuille's law states that flow, Q, equals our pressure gradient along that vessel, delta P, divided by resistance of that vessel, R. Now, it's important to note that our pressure gradient is essential as pressure drives flow. They are proportional to each other. As pressure goes up, flow will go up. That's helping us maintain oxygen delivery, waste removal, and other necessary functions. Now, if we rearrange Poiseuille's law here, we can rearrange it for the entire systemic circuit. And so let's just insert the flow and resistance parameters and pressure parameters for the entire circuit. And so flow through the entire circuit would be cardiac output. That's going to equal the pressure gradient for the entire systemic circuit. That's going to be our blood pressure. The difference between the aortic pressure and the right atrial pressure, which is essentially zero. And so we can just assume that's our measured aortic pressure, our blood pressure. And we're going to divide that by not resistance of an individual vessel, but the resistance of all of the vessels in that systemic circuit. That makes it more complicated, but let's just leave that as resistance of all of the blood vessels along the systemic circuit, total peripheral resistance. Okay, well, if we rearrange this equation, we get this over here. And we can see that blood pressure is going to equal our cardiac output times that total peripheral resistance. In other words, it's going to be proportional to the rate at which we're putting blood flow in, our cardiac output, and the rate at which it's flowing out of that arterial circuit, which is determined by the resistance of the small vessels. So if resistance is high, where blood flow through those small vessels will be lower and will trap more volume, and that would make our blood pressure go up. And so as resistance goes up, pressure would go up. If we dilate those vessels, we're going to find that blood flow out of that circuit, or what we call runoff, is going to increase. And so if our resistance goes down and our runoff goes up, then blood pressure will fall. Okay, hopefully that makes good sense. Now what we see in our graph, though, is that as cardiac output rises, and this should make perfect sense now, right? As our cardiac output rises, so too will our blood pressure, right? We're going upwards to the right here. And again, if we increase our cardiac output, our blood pressure will rise. That makes perfect sense. It starts to plateau towards the right here, and it plateaus because higher pressures tend to distend the vessels. More pressure on the inside, making those vessels larger. If you recall from Poiseuille's law, resistance of an individual vessel equals 8L eta over pi r to the fourth. Now note, I'm emphasizing this fourth power. That makes the radius of the vessel hugely important in determining resistance. And so as our vessels get distended by higher pressure over here to the right, what we find is the radii are going to get bigger of those vessels. Of course, that's going to make our resistance go down, right? And so the major factor here causing this plateau is the fact that our total peripheral resistance is going down because of that distension in the vessels. Our radius gets bigger, our resistance goes down. That's, of course, going to limit the rise in pressure here. Now, cardiac output's still going up, and so it's still winning. Our curve isn't coming downward here. It's still going upward. And so the cardiac output increase is still dominant, but it's becoming less dominant because the total peripheral resistance is actually falling as we distend those vessels here on the right. Now, during vasoconstriction, we're going to further constrict those vessels, right? That's going to decrease our runoff. That's going to add to this increase in cardiac output, making blood pressure go up even more. If we vasodilate, that's going to decrease our total peripheral resistance. That would oppose the rise in cardiac output and keep our blood pressure from rising quite as dramatically. That's why this line is lower.